So today we're going to talk about a recent paper that I wrote, and it regarded a course of communication law and policy. And so we dive into copyright and music sampling and the relationship between the two, and trying to get to the bottom of where in the world are we when it comes to the balance of user rights and creators' rights. So when you create a song as a producer or an artist, where are the limitations and the expansions of your right protections compared to what is known as fair use as individuals now in the technological age? So I started studying this at the beginning of likely 2021, somewhere in there. Last year, because I've always been intrigued by the technological age and its impacts on all of our lives. And with all of our lives comes artists' lives in their protections, in their creative endeavors, being whether it's used or ensuring that they get paid for their dues, or ensuring that people can use their music and their creative works in a fun and reasonable fashion without the big lawsuits piling up of copyright use. That's why on YouTube, if you create a video with somebody else's music, you get a copyright strike. So I was really interested in this whole idea of the balance between the two. And so that's what this is. It's an analysis between the relationship of two when it regards to statute law and the precedents that have came out of that. And so I'm going to skim through the paper and try to explain what I've learned and also include some of the questions that there still is. In the last 10 years, the number of sampled songs on the Billboard Top 100 have doubled since 2008. A total of 28 samples were found in the Billboard Top 100 songs in 2018, while at the end of year chart in 2008, 10 years prior, roughly 15 sampled songs were in those charts. That's double times the songs of sampled musical pieces of music within the top songs on the Billboard. So that says something. Sampling is defined as an excerpt from a recording. Everybody knows and loves what sampling is. If you're a producer out there, you know exactly what sampling is. Anybody that enjoys 1990s hip-hop also knows the utilization of other songs that were created before their time, and they brought these samples to life and ultimately created more popular songs out of those sampled tracks than the original work ever did in its lifespan. But there's an issue because statute law regulates the use of sampling in heavy measures. Federal statutes extend protection for copyrights to the original works of authorship, including literary works, musical works, any accompanying words, dramatic works, choreographs, motion pictures, recordings, photos, architectural works, the list goes on. Creatives are in the world, and there are ways for their work to get protected out there. This entails the detailed requirements for a copyright to be legitimized as well. The relationship between copyright and the First Amendment is so strong and so essential to the role of communication in the United States that in a case back in 1985, the Supreme Court labeled copyright as being the engine of free expression, which is bold enough to say that it's the balance between law and creative endeavors that combine to create a power which is the engine of free expression, while also being reimbursed in the capitalistic society that we obviously live in this democracy. If we look into the brief history / statute law, which has brought upon precedents in the standards in which laws abide by, in which cases also derive by, and also ultimately be resulted in. When we look at it, it's pretty interesting because there's a couple of copyright acts that have been set forth, and they go back way back to 1790. And so back in 1790, the Constitution enshrined in American law the principle of an author of any work may reap the fruits of his or her intellectual creativity for a limited amount of time. So what a beautiful thing to do, and what a beautiful way to really put it. However, disputes on copyright infringement have been inevitable. And so if we skip ahead into time, let's jump into 2005 perspective of the balance of copyright and protections of artists, as well as, fair use in the balance of sampling music. So if we throw the years back to 2005, this is when the infamous group of NWA came to a halt when they were sued in the case of Bridgeport Music Incorporated versus Dimension Films. The hip-hop group NWA sampled 3 notes lasting 2 seconds from the song Get Off Your Ass and Jam from the 1975 song 100 Miles and Running. These 3 notes constituted a sufficient case of copyright infringement, and the federal appellate court noted, get a license or do not sample. Sampling is never accidental. However, discerning between what constitutes copyright infringement and fair use, obviously music sampling may be a difficult task to take at hand. This is 2005 when the federal appellate court said it is never accidental to utilize other people's works, which is fair enough to say, right? 2005 is 15 years after the 1990 hit, and throughout the 1990 hip-hop era is when all the artists went and bought sampled music on the vinyl record, went home, and they went and sampled music. You have big, huge groups as NWA, Biggie Smalls, Tupac Shakur. You have guys like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg in this collective East Coast versus West Coast battles, trying to find the best sampled songs in the stores. It was all physical. Nothing was completely digitized at those moments, and sampled songs skyrocketed more than ever before as the technology advanced for them to do so. Let's go forward to 2016. Everybody knows who Madonna is. Madonna created a song called Vogue, which was taken to court on the means of copyright infringement on the plaintiff VMG Salsoul Inc. In the early 1980s, a producer produced a song called Oh I Love It, or Love Break, for the Salsoul Orchestra. In 1990, the same producer recorded the song called Vogue with Madonna and used a modified version of a snippet when recording Vogue. The modified snippet that this producer utilized on another track was 0.23 seconds of a segment. And it was modified. So check out the diagram here. This is the sheet music that comes with it. Obviously, you have Vogue's single horn hit. Then you have Love Break's horn hit. Then you have the double and the double. It's 2 modified versions. It looks very similar. A little off, but very similar. 0.23 seconds. The plaintiff submitted music reports from experts that the material was sampled. The defendants did not refute that the sampling occurred. As a result, the plaintiff asserted that it holds copyrights to the composition. Now take this. This is 11 years after the NWA precedent that sampling is never accidental. 11 years later, the de minimis doctrine comes out to protect. The de minimis doctrine is the use that an average audience member would not notice the sample. Pretty broad, but that is a doctrine and a legitimate doctrine that they used to decide this case back in 2016. So the takeaway there is that Madonna and her sample worked. Compared to NWA, the group got completely taken out by the federal appellate court then, but this time, this is 2015. And by this time, we have iPhones coming out, and obviously all the kids are having their iPods and Zunes, and everything was coming out. The technological age is now booming. Digitized music is becoming more prevalent. YouTube is also a factor in here. You have to think that things completely changed and turned upside down on the music industry by the time people got iPods in their hands. By the time you could buy a song off iTunes, it turned upside down. So what comes with Copyright Acts from 1975 or 6 is completely thrown out the window at this point when we think about 2016, let alone 2022, and we're still living off of the Copyright Act from 1976. And this is wild that it's not updated. It's still the precedent, but you get the precedents that are put out from these courts. And so that's why this is important. So let's go back into one more case law, one more case in which everybody knows the rock and roll group of Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin is infamous in one of their most famous songs known to man, a rock and roll classic called Stairway to Heaven. It got sent to court multiple times for those opening notes of Stairway to Heaven. It's infamous. And those were potentially sampled by another band. Spirit, Taurus. We're going to dive right into it. Led Zeppelin's 4th album was released, but this song, Stairway to Heaven, was challenged and was finally disputed in 2020. This is 2 years ago. The song was made in 1971. Law takes a whole lifetime to figure out. It's crazy. It's why I'm not super intrigued by it. But, when you start to read and figure out what's actually going on here, it's like, man, we're really working with the words that were written before this whole technological age. What do you do about it? Well, we can look at this. And what the claim was the band's Spirit claimed that the band Led Zeppelin was impervious to copyright by copying the opening notes of their song. So look again at the sheet music that we have here. Now, this is the go-getter. This is the big knife that tore the case apart because Spirit only copyrighted the sheet music. As you can see here, Stairway to Heaven with Taurus. It doesn't look super similar. I mean, it's similar, but the arpeggios don't completely align. So there's some differences. There's some similarities, but there's differences. What got Taurus completely and totally to a lost point of view is when they got their copyright, they only submitted the sheet music. And based on the 1909 Copyright Act, which at the time was before the 1976 Copyright Act, so it still applies in 2020. The precedent from there, when they submitted the sheet music, counts now from 1909. And so that deposit, the sheet music, is the only underlying evidence that they could use in court. If you listen to Taurus and then listen to Stairway to Heaven, it sounds very similar. Very similar. But when you look at the sheet music, which was the only deposit evidence that Taurus could really use, the defendants had a pretty good leeway on that. All they had to really say was, yeah, okay, we knew who Spirit was, and we knew the band, but we didn't know of the song. That's what Led Zeppelin really had to come out and say. And the district court ruled under the 1909, the scope of the copyright was circumscribed to the musical composition transcribed in the Taurus deposit copy. Thus, only the one-page deposit copy, one page of the song, not the sound recording, could be used to prove substantial similarity between Taurus and Stairway to Heaven. That's it. That's what it is. The copyright infringement evidence on the plaintiff heavily relied on the deposit copy that was protected from 1967, which was when they deposited that copy. Since the work was created during the 1909 Act, Some provisions continue to apply to copyrighted works, but it was before 1976. You can't do that. So that sucks. As a result, well, it sucks for Taurus, right? Zeppelin, you guys are rocking strong. That's what it is. As a result, the jury found Led Zeppelin to be acquitted from the copyright infringement. Obviously, the jury probably had to have listened to Stairway of Heaven, likely, maybe not listened to Taurus by Spirit. I mean, it's just what it is. The result came while Skidmore's owned the copyright of their song Taurus, yet due to the 1909 Act, it was not enough evidence. So, what is the law review analysis that we can even dive into? I look through different studies and peer reviews and trying to figure out, where do we stand. I've cited a bunch of different cases already that we've gone through, which, by the way, there's not a ton out there. It's not jumping on the mainstream media. It's just not a thing. So many believe that digitized music in this technological age in the use, fair use, is going to hold more power than it ever has before, which that was the case back when YouTube first became a thing. People didn't know technology. Technology was booming to a point where copyrighted work just isn't being acted on. Anyone could really use it. And, that was sort of the fun of the beginning of YouTube and streaming services and obviously the pirated services that were out there. But now that people attempt to get a grasp and a grip of figuring out, okay, where are the fine lines of fair use, which seem very, very hard to discern and really beat around the bush around it and get behind it, more power seems to be leaning to the use of people's fair use practices. Now, obviously, when you use Apple Music and streaming services, it's all protected. And you can't just go out and throw copyrighted music all around and get paid for it. That's not going to happen. The radio airwaves still serve as a practice to share music in a legal fashion. One of the biggest ways to do so with copyright approval. And some people argue that. One example is that the Eastern District Court of Louisiana noted that there was a misunderstanding leading to a successful case of fair use. Okay, so fair use has been used there. They also explained within that it included the practice or the principle that a new artistic meaning is needed. Artists should seek licenses for uses of existing copyrighted material that do not generate new artistic meaning. Again, it's what does that mean? What does new artistic meaning mean? Does it mean that you have to generate that sample into something completely revolutionizing, even though you're still utilizing an existing work? What are the concrete foundations or the fine lines within that? I just don't know if we're going to get there. I don't know what is going to completely outline what fair use is. Instagram utilizes features of, okay, maybe you can do 3 to 5 seconds. And YouTube, people have, their practices that they use. YouTube provides areas in their guidelines with the outlines of copyright. But in law, these are private companies. In law, what is it? Is it 3 to 5 seconds for anyone in which you can sample it? Is it 0.23 seconds, which NWA did back nearly 30 years ago? What is it? So it's still a toss-up if you get sent to court that you have a strong case of fair use. I mean, I don't see a tremendous amount of examples where fair use is being completely defended against. We see here that a 2018 study identified the avoidance of fair use in infringement cases by examining all musical cases from 1978 to early 2018, which found that 91% of music cases did not even consider fair use, which 82.7% of cases, defendants prevailed by contesting proof of the prosecutor's accusation of infringement. Then, explore a 4-factor balancing test for fair use, which was first developed at common law and later codified in an act, which was in 1976. Examples include various non-exhaustive and illustrative works, such as reproduction in copies or phono recordings. This is all pretty much redundant. Other means is if you're going to use it in the classroom or in a form of critique, which is totally fair and reasonable. Some people do it in a fashion of strict parody. That's also another way of not moderating it, but protecting it, is in a means of parody. Again, we're looking out for the people that are going to be sued of sampling music. And the answer is not clear, but people do it every single day. So there's another argument that Lee and Mosherna from an analysis in 2021 in which they argue the similarity in popular music is inevitable. They say the combinations, of which only a small fraction may be used ordinarily, the combinations and permutations of 13 tones give the amazing total of 6,227,020,800 combinations, of which only a small fraction may be used ordinarily. Popular songs particularly lie within a very small radius. In a confined space, a similarity of tone construction is inevitable. Practically every original idea the composer can think of has appeared somewhere before. It is a matter of probabilities, and every day a number of the new possibilities grow less. I mean, I think that's a very pessimistic way to really outline that. I mean, the statistics are there. It's 6 billion combinations, and we have 7 billion people in the world, but a fraction of them are musicians. So the possibilities of that, yes, over the span of hundreds of years, music has been around for thousands of years, right? But music has also shifted and changed. And also, I don't believe that every era of music got all of its potential sucked out of it. Take the 80s, for example. We have the 80s dance, you have the dance music from the 1980s. I don't think its potential was completely sucked out of it. Maybe people were ready for a change, and that's okay, but it still had potential, which is being sucked out of even now. And you see people pull inspirations from every culture, time period. Inspiration is everywhere. And so these combinations can be utilized in different facets, which make it sound different and in a new way, which is really an optimistic way to think about it. It's 6 billion. Yeah, there's only a small fraction that can be utilized, they say, in a very small radius of tones. But I would be more optimistic to say that. Let's think about it in the modern stance. Just consider that 40,000 new songs are added to Spotify each day. Again, this is in 2021, which translate into 280,000 new songs a week, 14.6 million new songs each year. Given automatic copyright protection, these millions of new works are all copyrighted. As of 2020, Spotify had 70 million tracks. At the current rate of growth, Spotify may soon hit 100 million tracks. Which is also, that's wild. 100 million tracks. To put these numbers into perspective, the number of new songs added to Spotify in 1 year is nearly 1.5 times more than the entire number of U.S. patents granted over 182 years. That is absurd, the amount of copyright protections that are being thrown left and right to each new piece of work. Approximately 10 million patents from 1836 to 2018. 10 million. Again, this is Liam Mosherna from a 2021 law review that they did, and this is just pure critique. They close out by saying fair use defense provides greater leeway to creators under copyright law than a defense simply contesting the test of infringement, which is totally fair. But the conclusion that really brings the light into me and really intrigues me with all of this is the interpretation and limitations and the future development of it all. Where is this going? Where's the implementation aspects? What's the interpretation and obviously the limitations of what it is? Because the current law and statutes is ever developing as technology is ever growing and changing. The imaginative desires for protection regarding creative works through copyright has been sought after since the 1700s. Throughout that time, the subject of creativity and regulation has revolutionized through time and advancements. While the creation and distribution of music continues to change, current regulations are in place to protect those creative works as well as create the opportunity to evolve pre-existing pieces into new works of art. This paper's purpose was to explore the perspectives and evolution of copyright and music sampling. This issue is of increasing importance because of the law's vulnerability to subjective reasoning and the immense amount of distribution of current and future music to online platforms. It is unclear how copyright laws on music sampling and regulating copyright infringements may evolve. Yet with an estimated 100 million tracks being on Spotify, protections for past creators and future creators are vitally necessary. After all, the relationship between copyright law and the First Amendment is so strong and so essential to the role of communication that in the United States, in Harper and Row, Publishers versus the Nation Enterprises, the Supreme Court labeled copyright the engine of free expression. Moreover, federal statutes extend protections for copyright to original works of authorship, including, of course, literary works, musical works, including any accompanying words, dramatic works, choreographic works, motion pictures, sound recordings, photography, architectural works, and lastly, pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works. Super cool stuff are protected, meaning that a great challenge to uphold these standards are here with technological platforms and digital sampling capabilities. The split between fair use and copyright infringements have been challenged with the fine line between the moral code. Bridgeport Music versus Dimension Films, again the NWA case, set a standard by concluding, get a license or do not sample. Sampling is never accidental. While VMG Salsoul Vilsicion, which was Madonna's case, suggests that the practices of sampling are not only fair to use under the de minimis doctrine, even if copying was evident, the content was too trivial. This suggests the blurry line is underway. However, in 2016, the case is headed to a favorable direction to some musical creatives. The conclusion reached in this research paper are limited by the rapid change in technological advancements in the digital sampling capabilities. 2 is the opportunity for subjective reasoning on a case-by-case basis. The third and last but not least is the evolving term of fair use and its defense against copyright infringement during the pursuit of creative achievement. With more music being increasingly outputted into evolving online platforms, the potential future research regarding the relationship between creative protections and reproduction is immensely critical. Future research may inquire about regulation on online music platforms. This may include the coding and priority of algorithms in place on online music platforms, which determine the difference between fair use and potential copyright infringements. Such research may audit the coding of prioritization regarding regulation and fair use. Such focus would decrease the opportunity of cases like O. Wald and Ora back in 2018, in which the alleged sampling of a musical composition was found to be transformative and quickly dismissed. Also, research may include outlining more concrete exceptions and limitations to fair use and copyright infringement. Such legislations focused on this research may further outline the balance between fair use and copyright infringement in the modern technological world. In conclusion, the relationship between copyright and music sampling poses an evolving topic that challenges past standards and previous systems by both artists and future creatives. The discussions between the two will expand as music continues to be shared online and throughout various ever-changing streaming platforms. So that's everything that we have. I'll link all the references to the paper here. As you can now see, all of the cases and references that we utilize within this discussion. It's interesting, it's evolving, it's dated, and it's confusing. There's creatives out there that they want to sample music and they're modifying it at home or in the studio. They say, man, this sounds awesome. But if you're not a high-profile artist, you may not have the power to really get copyright approval from the original creators. And that can pose as a legal issue, technically speaking, if you want a song to be mainstream, if you want it to be popular, in the public eye, to be accepted as your work. So I hope this could be used as a tool. I'm always learning, as we all are with all of this, and it's really fun to dive deep into the world of music and the business aspects in which labels work with, lawyers work with, and is all behind the scenes and behind the curtain when musical creatives just want to create new works and utilize the inspirations of previous works. So I hope you enjoyed. Drop a like. We'll see you next time, and thanks for tuning in.